or any other that you can go to these days is that people are going to pay for content because it's on mobile. And of course, people give all of the natural reasons for that. And so there's this idea that consumers are app happy, that they're loading up on apps. And then there's another phenomenon which is going on that I would describe as sort of apps envy, where we all know that moment where your friend comes to you and shows you an app that they've downloaded recently and said, hey, you got to have this, you got to download it. And we all give in to that temptation or that jealousy by downloading the app. And so, but for this panel today, I wanted to ask the question, are we really in a moment where fundamentally we found a new way for people to pay for content, or have they just loaded up onto their devices, and do we have to continue to find new ways? So first, let me quickly introduce the panel. Starting all the way at my right is Chris Ahearn. He's president of content at Thomson Reuters, and he oversees the distribution of news and information of what is the largest international news agency. And interestingly enough, he's also on the board member of China Web, which is one of the largest financial information providers to individuals in China. And we have Eric Hippeau. He's the CEO of the Huffington Post. You may have heard of it. And it's one of the most influential brands in media. And Eric has had a number of successful careers around the media business, including as the CEO and chairman of Ziff Davis, where he created ZDNet and ZDTV, and has now come to Huffington Post to grow that company. And Sara Öhrvall is head of R&D for Bonnier Group, and she's managing the building of new digital products across all of their businesses, whether it's magazine, newspapers, and TV. And then to my right is Scott Dinsdale, who's EVP of Digital Operations at Sony, and essentially what that means is taking artists like Shakira and Pink and John Legend and finding new ways of connecting them through digital technology. And Scott, before this, was head of technology at the Motion Picture Association of America, and before that at BMG Music, and believe it or not, before that at Merrill Lynch. And so I'd like to start off, Chris, with you. The great majority of your content today and the revenue comes from subscriptions. And it's you're in this position where people are paying for your content. And to some extent, that's due to the fact that you have real estate on their desktops. And at the same time, it's known that you're making huge investments. It's been said about $1 billion in new applications. What's working? What can the rest of us learn from your successes?
Well, first, I'm not sure it's because we have real estate. I think one of the earlier panelists, I think, put it well. We provide utility and value in the media services we have, whether you're a financial professional or a legal professional. Our business is different than, I think, almost everyone sitting here, and we focus on the professional markets, period. And you are right. We've publicly said we've spent and continue to invest about $1 billion into innovating our media assets and bringing them closer to the professional market. And I guess the way I would put it is, what we're trying to do is learn from consumer behavior and treat professionals like consumers. Because from my view, professionals are people too. And in the vast majority of applications and services that we and some of our competitors have offered, I mean, let's be honest, they've been pretty ugly. They are functionally worthwhile, but they don't have any kind of emotional engagement. So I don't think it's a real estate issue. I think it's an engagement issue. And what our focus is to take those subscriptions and that service and say to all of our subscribers, no matter what device, no matter what piece of real estate, to use your parlance, no matter where you are in the world, we want you to be connected to what you need from us to do your job. And it's really just as simple as that.
And so what you're saying is ultimately, although it's maybe the company that pays, that your challenge is to make sure it's interesting and engaging for the user.
I mean, I think that's the challenge for anybody who owns content, who manufactures and spends billions of dollars on content. If it's not engaging, if someone has to do it versus wants to do it, it's a very different brand perception and value perception. And from that perspective, then it's no different than, you know, whether you're a magazine or you're selling a desktop solution to help a financial trader make a trade.
Okay. Scott, under your leadership, Sony has really been in front of the entire rest of the market on both freemium and subscription models. And so, and you've made a lot of success in terms of your partnerships with Spotify and Vodafone. And can you tell us really where do you see this going? And tell us about your success with the sort of all you can eat and all you can drink models.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess the first couple of comments is, it's about a couple of things that some of which have been mentioned here already. I think the traditional three legs of any media company, sort of repertoire, marketing, and distribution. I think everybody's recognizing that repertoire is, you still need great songs, great stories. Marketing has changed, but you still need great marketing. But I think what's fundamentally changed, it's really not about distribution anymore. It's not about pushing product to the marketplace. It's about putting your product in an incredibly engaging user experience. And user experience has been mentioned many times today, and I think without question, that's really the key these days in terms of becoming successful. I think the second piece is experimentation. I mean, you quoted a couple of great examples. I think Spotify is a really exciting example of where things are going. You look at all the things that are going on in Sweden, and if that market is a representation of where services like Spotify can coexist with services like iTunes and others, there's some pretty exciting stuff going on there. But that Deezer, another example, was mentioned this morning by Orange. I think you're seeing 200,000 activations on the premium side. But at the end of the day, it's about an enormous amount of experimentation. I mean, I can't think of how many deals that have been done over the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of deals throughout the world. Some really big deals with great amounts of marketing behind them, some very small innovative deals that have really resulted in understanding that consumers want great experiences, and there's a continuum of consumers. There's not just a consumer. We got very used to this notion of the CD being the packaged product for everybody, and that's what everybody wanted. And you kind of forget how innovative the CD was in its time. But now people really want very different experiences, and not just things like a difference between an iTunes experience for downloading, or a Spotify experience for streaming, or a connected experience, or a cloud-based locker-style experience, but all the way down through the continuum of things like fan-based experiences. I mean, if you're a fanatic about AC/DC, just being on Spotify or being on any other service is not going to satisfy what you want from that band. So you want to create a much more intimate, much more engaging experience for that fan. So I think it's about the notion of continuum and segmentation. It's about experimentation, and it's about really putting user experience at the fundamental forefront.
I mean, I can imagine, or I can only imagine, the sort of hand-wringing that must go on inside of your meetings around replacing the revenue from the CD. I mean, do you feel in terms of the things that you're doing, you're pushing the company towards, that you can get consumers to pay for music?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just me. It's a group of people around the world, and you really have different dynamics in different markets. But it's very difficult. I mean, you're used to this notion of, I mean, people talk about going from dollars to dimes, and those are the kinds of discussions you're having. I mean, you look at deals, whether it's a YouTube deal or a Spotify deal, you're talking about fractions of pennies per play. And you look at the usage models, and for example, from a marketing perspective, the way you sell in Spotify is very different than the way you sell, or in any particularly socially engaged media, than the way you might sell in iTunes.
Yes.
iTunes is a very traditional, here's what's happening, here's what's being marketed, here's what's in front of your face, whereas Spotify or socially engaged services are much more about recommendations and friends and so forth. And so, for example, on Spotify, we're actually starting to see the appearance in a fairly big way of the long tail. Now, it's not the long tail in the context of every song gets millions of plays. It's that great song from 1972 is finally now reappearing, and people are discovering that was a great song. So it's still going to be skewed towards, like movies are always skewed towards great stories. It's always going to be skewed towards great songs. But I think, to the point of research, for example, really trying to understand how those different consumers are reacting to those different experiences is critical to how you continue to mature it. But yeah, they're difficult conversations because you're sitting there with a bunch of iTunes users who may skew very heavily in terms of their purchasing habits. You got to be very careful about using averages. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Flaw of Averages, and I think that's an important way of looking at the digital marketplace, because you can now create a service for consumers who love music, who are spending an enormous amount of money on iTunes, but now if they can get it for minimal pennies, you have to figure out how to balance those two equations.
Eric, the whole world is looking at what you're doing with Huffington Post and wondering how are you going to take what is arguably this huge, huge audience base and make it into an extraordinary business. And when you look at the numbers, they're pretty amazing. Today, you have roughly 25 million unique users a month. And when you compare that, that's over 2.5 times the circulation of the 15 largest newspapers in the United States. And I'm talking about physical distribution. And yet, at the same time, those newspapers have about $2.7 billion in revenue that's coming from consumers. I'm not including advertising, just what people are paying to buy those newspapers. Do you see this as an opportunity yourself? How are you going to go after it?
Well, we made the decision, and it stands, that we will never charge for our content to our users. And there's a whole variety of reasons for that, but on the revenue side, it's because you point out the $2.7 billion in subscription or newsstand revenues, but there's a much bigger advertising market out there that is looking to engage with the kind of audience that people who read the news or who are engaged with the news want. If you look at the demographic of people who are online, and particularly that core that I think we represent well, which we describe as social news, the people who use all the social tools to share, to discuss in groups, to post their own content, to comment. Last month we published 3.5 million comments from our users, all moderated, the comments. So that level of engagement attracts an audience that is much better educated, earns much more money, and holds positions in society that are much more responsible than, excuse me, by the average, but then not only the average news person, but also the average user of any site on the internet. And that audience, in a world where we have lost trust in pretty much everything, from government, Congress, journalists, by the way, are rated just one small level above Congress, and it doesn't say very much. But we've also lost trust in institutions. We lost trust in Toyota. We just lost trust in Tiger Woods. You name it, we've lost trust in it. So it's very important for big marketers to engage with the kind of audience that we represent, because those are the people who are going to get people's reputations back. And if you look at the Huffington Post and you look at the kind of campaigns that we run, IBM, GE, HP, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, all of these big brands recognize that. If I start to charge my users, I'm limiting the size of my audience, I'm going to limit the engagement, and I'm going to go into this tailspin that pretty much everyone, with maybe one exception being the Wall Street Journal, everyone who has tried to charge in the news category, because when somebody this morning said, well, the top 10 applications on iPhone represent whatever, a couple $1 billion, all of them are games. There is, right. You won't find a news application in the top 10. So in the news category, everyone who's tried to erect a paywall and charge their customers have had a terrible experience. We're just not going to go through that.
You've talked about these people who are socially active in the Huffington Post. You've called them social informants. Do you think your advertisers recognize the value of those people?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very fortunate to have been able to gather and nurture this community, those social informants. And today we are pioneering some very, very innovative social marketing campaigns. We'll be talking on the panel later on at 2:30, but more specifically about social marketing that have engaged really big brands, and they completely see the value of being engaged in real time, on a moment-by-moment basis with this audience.
Sorry, I always get nervous, Eric, when I hear people make unequivocal statements like "I will never," because usually that means they will next year. Not accusing you of that, but also I think it's a little bit apples and oranges what you're throwing out there. I mean, the Huffington Post, one of the beautiful things you've done is you curate the news that's out there more than creating the news itself. So your business model is very different from someone who spends $100 million, $50 million, $200 million, $500 million on creating news content. And I think that this notion that, oh, people won't pay for the news in an application or people won't pay for the news as an experience is just misguided.
Well, first of all, you're B2B, so it's very different. I'm not talking about that marketplace.
No, I'm talking about
the general marketplace,
newspapers, et cetera.
And I employ 75 professional journalists. I'm about to hire 25 more. We create 2/3 of our own content between our bloggers and our journalists. 2/3 of our own content is original.
You said us before you didn't want us to be polite.
No, I don't want. In fact, I've asked the panel ahead of time not to be polite and to allow me to be impolite in interrupting them. Sara, you have created what people view as the sort of best-in-class replica applications of a magazine. I mean, Popular Science Plus is people enjoy using it, and it's gone way beyond just being a PDF. Do you think it has to be a replica of a magazine in order to get people to pay for it?
No, I actually get quite offended when you call it a replica.
Oh, well, facsimile?
No, when we created Mag Plus, that's the platform for digital magazines, and we launched Popular Science on the iPad. The intention was to preserve what's so beautiful with the magazine, that's the curated experience, the lean-back experience, but to re-engineer the physicalities of the magazine. And find different ways of presenting stunning imageries, a lot of text. And actually research shows clearly that if you have a replica version of a magazine or a newspaper in that sense, people do first feel more comfortable with it. So you may get really scary results out of the focus group because people say, oh, this looks good. I would prefer the version that looks closer to the original print. However, when you then ask them and you compare it with more advanced, re-engineered presentations of content, they would say the re-engineered version is the one I would pay for. The other one, yeah, maybe I use it, I keep it as a backup to my print. And especially for news, we're going to launch 5 news applications within 2 weeks, hopefully. And we could see the same thing. The people who still have a subscription to a newspaper, they're quite happy with that. There still are those people. And they obviously don't want a replica. If they want something on their tablet, their iPad, they want something different. They want something that adds to it. Quite often it's about even more curated, a higher selection of news stories, and stories that evolve during the day that has more analytics behind it, analysis behind it, and that where you can continue to dig deeper into the story. And also the people who've left the newspapers, who are not longer subscribing, they're obviously fed up with the newspaper as it was. So they don't want a replica either. So I think the whole replica thing in the digital world is no thing.
Are you getting people to pay? I mean, your experience, do you feel that what you're creating, these experiences, is something that consumers will value?
Absolutely, and I think that's the most positive experience, obviously. We are charging $5 per issue, which is actually exactly the same as for print. So we're trying to do dollar to dollar on that one. And yes, it's hard, but it's turned out that people are willing to pay for this recreated experience. They're also willing to pay for time for myself, which I think is an interesting new thing with these devices, the tablets, because it's actually the first piece of electronics you want to cuddle up with in the couch. And that happens to coincide quite nicely with what you do with a magazine. You want to sort of have your own moment in time. And you don't have that much or that often, therefore it's highly valuable for consumers. So if you create that relaxed, curated experience with storytelling that has a beginning, it has an end, there's a sense of completion, yeah, people are willing to pay for the first time in a long while, I think.
So Spencer's already waving at me in terms of telling me how much time. I'm not going to tell everybody, but he's told how much time we have left. So I just have a bunch of questions for the panel, and just go for it. First of all, can free and premium coexist at the same time? I mean, are you concerned that can you be in both models, and can they work together?
So this is something that I really don't understand. Somebody's going to have to explain that one to me. Why would I want to charge my best customers and not charge the others? There's something that I don't understand. I'm on the board of a company that runs hotels. It has nothing to do with content, but there's a reason why I'm mentioning this. If you notice in the hotel business, the cheaper the room, the more amenities you have. So particularly when it comes to Wi-Fi. If you go to a cheap hotel, you get free Wi-Fi. But if you go to the St. Regis, well, I shouldn't mention these brands. If you go to an expensive hotel,
Like the St. Regis.
please don't tweet that; I'll get into trouble. If you go to if you go to an expensive hotel, you have to pay $20 or whatever for Wi-Fi.
So why is that, Eric?
Well, the management of the company on whose board I am knows how what displeasure it brings me. So to me, when you have these modified paywalls that people are talking about, where you can go in and sample 1 or 2 pages because you're going in through SEO, and they still want to take advantage of Google on one side, and then they want to beat up on Google on the other side. So they still want you to come in, and they'll give you 1 or 2 pages to sample for free. But if you want to go deeper, you're going to have to pay for it, which is, to me, the same thing as charging, at the lower end and not at the high end. So it doesn't make any sense to me.
But premium is not the same thing as you have a paywall. I think there's a huge difference between the paywall system, which is exactly what you described, which I needed to believe in. But on the other hand, I mean, even in the hotel, you do pay more for a greater hotel experience, and you're quite happy to do that. And the same thing, I think, for magazine news, media publishing. If you create a much better experience, a different experience, which may exist somewhere else, I think a few people are willing to pay for that, and you can charge. But that's not about having a wall. So as soon as you get interested, you're sort of in the paying system.
Yeah,
it's a deliberate choice.
I think it's dangerous to look at it as kind of as a black and white situation. I think a lot of it depends on who the consumer is and who you're going after. I think that, for us, when we've got, classical music consumers who want great quality, willing to pay for it, does it make a lot of sense to put a free classical music service? I'm not sure it does. On the other hand, you're dealing with, a segment of, 13 to 25, who frankly have grown up in an environment where paying for music is just not something they're used to doing. The notion of being able to offer them a tier of service to get them to start experiencing a new environment, engaging with it, and then saying, hey, if I get this feature or that feature, all right, maybe I have to pay a few dollars to get that. But now you're starting to change that culture into maybe you're not getting all the money you'd like to get out of that segment, or all the money you've historically gotten out of that segment, but now you're bringing them in. So I think you have to, again, I would go back to, A, you have to experiment, and B, it's about understanding pieces of your audience and what's going to be attractive to them.
I think there's one other thing, Eric, which is, kind of fundamental to your point is size matters. I don't think size matters. I think, it can work very well for companies, it works for ours, to focus on niches and go extremely deep in those niches. So even with the news, I do agree with you, it is annoying right now how many people are prosecuting it. But I think free and premium can and will exist. I think that it makes sense if someone provides a valuable service and there's an engagement with that brand across, whether it's a physical paper or a tablet or my phone, and starting to think about it that way as a service, as opposed to, I'm going to try to sell you an app, I'm going to try to sell you something, your newsstand, I'm going to try to sell you something somewhere else. I think if the news business changes its conception of how it engages with consumers, then I think it can work.
Well, I used to, as was mentioned, I used to publish magazines, and excuse me, I always loved magazines. I still subscribe to a lot of magazines. But the fundamental fact about the magazine subscription economics is that they're fantastic on the way up. So you launch a new magazine, and you're capturing all this audience, and you're paying almost nothing to acquire this new audience. And then eventually you hit a wall. You hit there's a natural level, and now by then, if you're still selling advertising, you've promised a rate base. So okay, my magazine, 500,000, it's a rate base. So now you have to maintain this rate base. And what happens is, as you have churn, the economics of replenishing that churn, the cost of acquiring these new customers rises and rises and rises. And in many conditions, particularly with mature products, and I would suspect the Wall Street Journal is in that category, although I suspect that we'll never know. But you get to a
or they
point,
won't tell us.
But you get to a point where if you just analyze the subscription economics, you're losing money on just that portion of it. So people don't. You have to think it through, and it's not always the right thing to do.
We've seen, once again for the panel, we've seen a number of new models, new ways in which people consume content, and that people are paying. I mean, it's everything from Zynga to Spotify to even Groupon. What do you think the next wave of businesses and ways in which people are going to consume and pay for content? What do you think they are?
Well, social commerce, which you mentioned, is a form of content. And in fact, Groupon, Living Social, Guild City, and all these companies which are forming all hire editors who are responsible for curating the offers. And if you look at the offers that they're offering, they're all extremely well put together with a lot of content and very appealing. And it's a form of Groupon, I don't know what their revenues are, but they seem to be already worth a few $1 billion. Right?
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of experimentation that hasn't yet been done in the media publishing industry, like the access model, like it's about Spotify, similar model for very niched target groups with specific content could certainly be interesting. And also if you can, as you said, find very specific offers, like Groupon-like offers or similar to that niche audience, I think that's the core competence that media publishers have, to communicate with very specific target groups and find content that engages them. And there are certainly ways of finding new business models attached to that.
Yeah, I think what goes along with that is some obvious ones. Integrated licensing. I mean, one of the most popular games, Tap Tap Revenge, right? It's a terrific game integrated with music, and we're seeing, I think, repackaging an album as an application, I don't think anybody's that excited about. But on the other hand, there's lots of, we just released Slayer Pinball, right? So lots of games, lots of ways to integrate. What's going to eventually move the needle? I think it's going to be a whole bunch of these. I don't think it's going to be any one single killer app.
Finally, we are really running out of time. I just want to ask each of our panelists to give us the quick 1 minute sort of bottom line. Where do each of you see the world going in terms of getting people to pay for content? And Scott, I'll start with you.
I think things have come around a little bit. I think there's a recognition that, and particularly speaking about music, that artists are creative and deserve to be remunerated for what they do. I think it's going to be a combination of, I think, some niche services and hopefully some mass market services. I think that's the one thing we really haven't seen yet in terms of real penetration on the music side is huge mass market penetration. I think that's certainly where a lot of our focus is today. I think we'll just continue to experiment, continue to drive forward. We're starting to see the curve, maybe not quite bottom out, but getting close. And so I think it's just more of the same.
Sarah?
Well, I think it's already there, isn't it? It's this year there will be 4.1 billion applications downloaded, and 75% of all applications in the iPad are paid for applications. So it's already happening. So I think it's more a matter of being there. So my short advice would be to launch media content, experiment and learn what is it that triggers people. Because when there was a recent study in the US where a lot of consumers were asked about what they're willing to pay for a magazine specifically, and they would answer $2 to $4 an issue. And I think that's a big thing, because that has not happened for any website or similar. So the consumers are there, but there is a huge supply problem, because there is not much media content out there as applications if you compare to the number of games or the number of other utility applications.
Eric, your bottom line again.
Okay, well, my bottom line is I represent the general news category. Looking at Chris. In the general news category, news wants to be free. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. It's not going to happen. News is, you're being hit by news on all your devices as we speak. There's no way that you're going to want to pay me to give you your news. So what's going to happen is, it's a growing business. There's more people engaged with news than ever before, in part because people like the Huffington Post, and we're not the only ones, have been able to tailor a product that attracts a younger audience, that's more social, that's more like the way they want to do it. That younger audience is extremely educated and affluent, attracts a great quality of advertisers, and that's where the monetization is going to come from.
People pay for content. I pay for music. My kids pay for music. They always will, I hope. I agree with Eric. I've had fun kind of tweaking, but I fundamentally agree on the general news point. People will pay if publishers, and I'm going to focus on the news industry for a second, innovate. I think over time, you know, with the exception of people like the Huffeau, we've seen stagnation in news and news innovation and the way people have presented it. And I think that that's really the source of the problem. I think that you will see people innovate, provide value and utility of the news that, as it applies to individuals, and people will pay for that. But it's going to take some time, and there's going to be a lot of dead carcasses along the way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a terrific panel. Thank you. I'm sorry that we didn't have time.